Thank you. I think a very important concept for us to get into this subject is an anastomotic leak is just an abnormality of the wound healing process. It's all that it is. So if we understand how wound healing takes place, maybe we can look into the pathophysiology of anastomotic leaks in a better way. Now, if you remember from medical school, the phases that we have in wound healing depend on the timing. The first phase in wound healing is what we call the wet phase that takes place immediately after an injury happens. And what happens is that all the components of the complement and the coagulation factors get out to stop the bleeding and form the thrombus. Then we have the inflammatory phase, where we're going to have all those cells that are in the blood vessel that are going to eat the bacteria and clean the debris. Then we have to reconstitute the area that has been injured, the proliferative phase. And finally, particularly in the GI tract, a very important phase is the remodeling phase, where we want to have a balance between how much collagen and other matrix proteins we produce and how much we destroy them. I have a little video here. Let's not have the volume, please. So I'll tell you myself. The first thing we need to remember is that in the normal state, the blood cells circulate in the center of the blood vessel. They do not touch the walls of the blood vessel. So we have all the blood elements in the center. We are all familiar with the blood elements, the red cell, the neutrophil, macrophages, lymphocytes. I can't see all the way, platelets, and of course we have the endothelial cell. The endothelial cell is one of the most important cells to start the wound healing process. It has adhesion molecules, and I'll tell you what is important, that in a normal state are inside the cytoplasm. Let's see, we have an injury. It doesn't matter which part of the body. So what we said is immediately we're going to have this disturbed flow where the cells are going to get in contact with the endothelial cells. And the endothelial cells don't like this one bit. So what's going to happen is that those adhesion molecules are going to come to the surface. Why is this so important? Because that contact between the blood cells and the endothelial cell is going to start the efflux of all the cells in the blood vessel to the extracellular matrix. The endothelial cells also contract, and the gap between them becomes bigger and allow all of those cells to come out. We absolutely need to have this before we can start the wound healing process. You can see how the different elements of the blood are coming out to the extracellular compartment. Then, as you can see, we're going to see it all together. We have that increased permeability because of the contraction of the endothelial cells, and we see the components of the complement, coagulation factors to stop the bleeding, and then we're going to have the different cells come out. This is the neutrophil. Remember, it has very potent granules that are important to kill bacteria and debris. So those are released. A little later, we have the macrophage with the pseudopods that the macrophage kind of eats the bacteria and destroy them inside of the cytoplasm. And finally, we have the smart cell, the lymphocyte, that is the one that is going to regulate the inflammatory process. The lymphocytes knows when to stop it. If we have too much inflammation, then we start eating our own tissue, and of course, we don't want that. So then we have the proliferative phase because we have to reconstitute what has been destroyed. So we have myofibroblasts, fibroblasts that are coming to the area of the wound to produce the connective tissue proteins. And finally, we have the remodeling phase. And remember, I told you in the skin, this is not such a big deal, because if we have too much collagen or other matrix proteins, we're going to have a scar that doesn't look good, but it doesn't have the functional outcome that when we have a colon with too much fibrosis, because that is going to give us stenosis, or it's going to give adhesions and all the problems related to that. So to recap, the first thing that happens, we have contact of the blood cells with the endothelial cells. You can see this scanning picture. Most of them, of course, red cells, but you are seeing some of the blood cells over here. And here we have an electron microscopic picture, and we have the endothelial cell. So we have the extravasation of all of these components to start the coagulation and the inflammatory phase. Neutrophils. Remember, the neutrophil has to come out of the blood vessel into the extracellular matrix. This is a difficult thing to do. There are several steps that the neutrophil has to go through for this to happen. For example, margination, rolling, adhesion, transmigration, and finally degranulation. Now, for this to happen, the first thing is the neutrophil senses that there is an injury. There are certain agents outside the blood vessel that are going to call the neutrophil to come and do its job. So the neutrophil has to walk outside the blood vessel. This is through the pseudopods. After that, there is a period that we call the priming, because the neutrophil has to get those granules ready to be released. And finally, by the way, this phase is inhibited by TNF. So your patients with IBD that receive this kind of drug, you can see why have problems with wound healing. And finally, we have the degranulation. Why is this important for us to remember? Because all of this requires oxygen. Neutrophils are not anaerobes. They need that oxygen through the production in the mitochondria. So obviously you need a good blood flow for this to take place. Furthermore, the way that the neutrophils kill the bacteria is through the production of derivatives of the oxygen. So if you don't have good flow, you don't have good irrigation, this is going to get in trouble. Same situation for the macrophage. The difference is that the macrophage starts that proliferative phase releasing some of agents that are going to call the fibroblasts and myofibroblasts. And as I was telling you, the one that knows what's going on is the lymphocyte that is going to say, stop, the wound healing process is done, now we need to start proliferating. So that proliferative phase, first in the colon, we need to have the epithelium coming back, and we have to produce collagen and other proteins that form the extracellular matrix. The remodeling phase is a very tricky process because you need a perfect balance between production of collagen and other matrix proteins and the degradation of these, so you don't have stenosis or adhesions. Excuse me. Now, the wound healing in the colon is a little different than in the skin because we have many, many more bacteria. We need to reconstitute not only the fibrotic tissue, but the muscle that we have in the wall. And also, naturally, the enzymes that destroy the extracellular matrix are in more amounts in the colon than in the skin. Now, we need to remember what we said at the beginning. An anastomotic leak is an abnormality in wound healing. And there's so many things that can happen that are going to alter the wound healing process. Medications, we're all familiar with steroids or anti-TNFs. Age, people that are older, it's not that they don't heal properly, but it takes longer for them to heal. That's normal. Testosterone and the derivatives are very potent inhibitors of wound healing. Estrogen, on the other hand, stimulates wound healing. everybody knows diabetic patients heal not normally for a variety of reasons. First of all, because of the hypoxia due to the blood vessel damage, but also the direct toxicity of the glucose derivatives. Patients with immune diseases, patients that have problems with the endothelial cells that don't start the wound healing process. Hypoxia, people that have atherosclerosis, for example. And more recently, we have realized that the type of bacteria that we have in the colon is very important also for the development of anastomotic leaks. So believe it or not, many, many years ago, Dr. Kohn from New Orleans kind of had the idea that the bacteria had to do something with the wound healing process and the anastomotic leaks. And he came up with the idea of preparation of the colon, though I don't know, depending on the part of the world, but it's not done in every case. Now we need to remember, whether we like it or not, we are full of bacteria in our body. We have 100 trillion bacteria in our colon. There's all kinds of bacteria that are there. Some of them are always going to be nice and they're not going to do anything to us. But there is a group of bacteria, the Enterococcus, Pseudomonas, and E. coli, that represent a minority of them, that these are the ones that can be very harmful when you have an anastomosis. Why? It has been shown that some of these 3 bacteria that I mentioned can switch the genotype and start secreting proteins, enzymes that are going to destroy the extracellular matrix. And this has been shown in rat animals. So this is the normal state. We have here the bacteria that are not in contact with the enterocyte. You have the mucus layer, which is also important. Now, when we have an injury, the first thing that is going to happen is we stop secreting mucus, because that is secondary. So what's going to happen is the bacteria are going to come in touch with the enterocyte in a direct way. And the ones that mutate are going to start secreting all kinds of enzymes that destroy the extracellular matrix. So you can imagine that when that happens, we cannot reconstitute the extracellular matrix that is going to maintain together the area of anastomosis. Now, very interesting, more recently, it has been shown that there's likely a relationship between the bacteria and the blood flow, because the genotype switch alone rarely gives you anastomotic leak. When you have genotype switching plus ischemia, for one reason or the other, so this is a rat model, devascularization and the anastomosis, that is when we have the anastomotic leaks. So bacteria and blood flow hold hands. So there's several things that are going to dictate the fate of an anastomosis. Obviously, a good surgeon, a person that has a good immune system, bacteria that don't turn destructive, and as we said, a good blood flow. So the question that I'm going to leave you with is, what would be the best way to measure the blood flow that we have in an anastomosis? Thank you.